Good morning, and thank you for joining me on the path to liberty. It's Wednesday, December 30th, 2020, and this is the time of year we all know we're going to hear people wax eloquent about all the things over the past year, good and bad. Of course, there was a ton of bad stuff in 2020, or what's coming up in the next year, good or bad. But I don't want to be like everybody else. I mean, we know 2020 was crap for liberty, just like pretty much every year, but far worse. And 2021 really isn't looking too awesome either. So on this episode, instead of doing what is kind of the standard, I want to highlight an important message from James Madison, the father of the Constitution, and focus on what needs to be and what can be done about it. My goal is to kind of tie together a bunch of episodes I've done over the year. I'm going to cite a bunch of them and link to them in the show notes and put it into one story, an actual achievable path to liberty. But first of all, before getting to that, my name is Michael Bolden. We broadcast live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time from here in my home office and studio in downtown Los Angeles for the 10th Amendment Center. Our show homepage, which I just mentioned, has everything you need to follow this program. We're on a bunch of different platforms. We live stream on video on Facebook, YouTube, DLive, Twitch, and Twitter. And we have archive video versions on a bunch of platforms like Library, LBRY, library.tv. Please follow us there. It is, I think, the best platform for censorship resistance. We're also on Brighteon, BitChute, BitTube, and probably elsewhere soon in the new year. Our audio platforms, the podcast editions on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, Amazon, and elsewhere. Find all of those, all of the archives for the show, all the links that I include in each individual episode for you to read and learn more, and even our membership program where you can support us for as little as $2 a month. All that and more at the show homepage, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. All spelled out, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. And while we wait for everyone to get their notifications to join us on the live video, I want to say a quick hello to everyone out in the live chat. I really appreciate you being here, whether it's your first time or you've been here every single episode since day one. MRGF78, Funky Euphemism, Tim Martin in Casa Grande in the house. Wow, that's a pun. Dixie Strong, Tyler B, hope you're doing better, buddy. Blue North Wind, good to see you. Melissa Harrell as well. Dan Reed, we got to catch up sometime in the new year. We definitely haven't talked to you in a while. Good to see you. Thanks for being here. Southern Gent. And who else? Lawrence Smith in West Virginia. Grant Sundberg, I appreciate your feedback over on Twitter and all your support of our work. Thanks, man. Alan Mosley, I hope one of the instruments is some smooth jazz sax. Nothing finer, right, buddy? And everyone else, I appreciate you all for being here. I will look a little bit later in the show if I don't get on too many tangents and try to answer some questions. So please continue leaving those comments and questions. Otherwise, I will look at them in the archive of the video or comments on podcasts, etc. a little bit later on. I try to reply to as many as possible. But let's get right to this. And I want to first start out with a quote I've used many, many, many times, and I can't repeat it enough. It's from John Adams, who I did an episode on, calling his transition from the Atlas of Independence to a monarchist over the years, citing Mercy Otis Warren. But he had this great quote that I think is just timeless. There's only one word wrong with it, and if you've heard me talk about it before, you know what it is. And this was in 1776. John Adams said, "Fear is the foundation of most governments." Fear of freedom, fear of foreign danger, fear of whatever it may be, is what government uses to build its power and to attack liberty. The only word I would get out of there is the word most. Just delete it, and then we're absolutely correct, and Adams was pretty solid on that. I'm not going to really debate him, but fear is the foundation, and fear is what drives the largest government in the history of the world. And then this quote from James Madison, which is really the title of this episode as well, but so important for what we're talking about today. And I've got a piece of the quote up on the screen here so you can read along, but here's the full thing. This was him in the Philadelphia Convention. I will link to the source of this so you can read it in context at your own convenience. But in the Philadelphia Convention, planning to come up with the Constitution for the United States. This was on June 29, 1787. Here's what James Madison had to say. "A standing military force with an overgrown executive will not long be safe companions to liberty. The means of defense against foreign danger have been always the instruments of tyranny at home. And man, was he prophetic. Actually, he was just a student of history. It wasn't that he was like some prophet. Maybe he was gifted in his, but he was a hardworking dude who studied history, and he saw the same kind of thing play out over and over and over. And the founders, the founding generation, they understood history far better than us. Even somebody like Patrick Henry. So if you talk about, if you grade on a curve, Patrick Henry wasn't really the guy that people look to as an expert on history, but the stuff that he read year in and year out puts us pretty much all to shame. I know he put me to shame over and over and over, and that's why, however you look at it, they understood what was coming in the future because they could see how history plays out over and over and over again. Now, since we 100% cannot rely on the federal government to limit its own power. It will never happen, and that's what people have done. They rely on it through elections, through courts, through protests. They're basically asking, begging, hoping the federal government to limit itself. That will never happen. We have proof all around us. The Constitution, words on paper, they'll never enforce themselves. They can't. They shouldn't be expected to. Madison himself told us not to. They called it a mere parchment barrier. They will never enforce themselves. So we need to use what the founders advised, resistance and nullification against those instruments of tyranny at home. And today I want to share with you my top 3. And as a refresher, this definition, I've been citing it more and more. I don't know where it went, but this is from an old school article by Derek Sheriff, who hasn't written for us in years, but hopefully someday he'll find some time to do so again. Derek's a great dude. He says, in order to best understand what nullification is, I know some of you have heard this recently, but I think we really need to focus on this. We need to first understand some things that nullification is not. And then I'm going to get into 3 instruments of tyranny at home and the steps that we can take, not in detail, but I'll cite some other episodes that you can check out for each of those, steps that we can take to actually deal with them and support the Constitution and liberty. And here's how Derek put his definition of what nullification is not. Nullification is not secession or insurrection, but neither is it unconditional or unlimited submission. Nullification is not something that requires any decision, statement, or action from any branch of the federal government. Nullification is not the result of obtaining a favorable court ruling. Nullification is not the petitioning of the federal government to start doing or stop doing anything. Nullification doesn't depend on any federal law being repealed. In fact, nullification is actually pushing to bring those laws to an end in practice, whether they repeal them or not. And nullification does not require permission from any person or institution outside of one's own state. And we can even bring that down to a county or a local level. And some people practice individual nullification through things like agorism and things like that. So this is a great definition of what nullification is not. In short, we're basically having to learn how to exercise our rights, whether the government people want us to or not. So let's talk about what Madison had to say. The means of defense against foreign danger have been always the instruments of tyranny at home. One of the first things that come to mind to me, of course, is gun control. And a lot of people think that the right to keep and bear arms is really just about hunting. It's right to keep and bear arms so you can shoot a deer, right? Or it's for protecting your home and your family, or to defend against a tyrannical government. Now look, it is all of that, but it certainly is more, and almost everybody misses the more. And I covered that more in an episode, this is actually last year, so I'm not necessarily just tying together episodes from this year. I've got an outlier here. Standing armies. Why the founders wanted you to own military-style weapons. And in that episode, I talked about how the founders not just supported the right to keep and bear arms for those hunting, protecting your property, protecting your family, protecting against your own bad government, but it was a tool to defend against what they saw as a great danger, if not for some of them, the greatest danger to liberty on the ground in practice, and that is standing armies. You talk about huge defense spending, militarism, an empire that is around the entire world, spending more money on militarism than the next 7 to 10 countries combined. That we're supposed to be afraid of all these countries, and so they have to steal all our money to fund all this garbage to protect us. Here again, fear is the foundation. We're afraid of the bad guys all around the world, and then of course the means of defense are used as the tyranny at home. So the right to keep and bear arms, they're actually practicing gun control on the whole globe, really, is what the U.S. government does, the empire, the policemen of the world. But we don't need to have that kind of military presence. I mean, not even close to it. And the founders, the prescription to fight against these large military enterprises, these standing armies, these massive institutions, which Madison said armies leads to debt and taxes, and armies and debts and taxes are the known instruments, not just widely recognized, but the known instruments for putting the many under the domination of the few. So they recognize that the more that people had military style or military weapons, the less you would have to rely on a professional military force. And in fact, think about when they actually talked about these types of things. This was just years after they fought a long, bloody war against the largest empire on the face of the earth at that time, the British. And if the people hadn't had access to military weapons, there is no chance they would have won. There is no chance. They would have been absolutely crushed. It was difficult as it was. They got help from elsewhere. But let's say they just had a handgun or something like that, a pistol. They would have been in big trouble. Here's a great quote from James Madison that I cited in that episode. Again, in the Philadelphia Convention, August 23rd, 1787, he said, "As the greatest danger to liberty, not a big one, not one to worry about." Madison himself, father of the Constitution, said, "The greatest danger to liberty is from large standing armies. It is best," he said, "it is best to prevent them by an effectual provision for a good militia." So how do we actually do things? I think there are two really important steps that we can take today that actually can be done. They're happening in some degree already. We need to, A, remove restrictions on the right to keep and bear arms in state and local law, and then we also have to think about the feds. In fact, most people actually work on the right to keep and bear arms. It's almost as if the federal gun control doesn't exist. It doesn't create an environment where gun control is pervasive. People are just concerned about what paperwork they need to fill out, or, well, I can't have, well, is this an NFA weapon or whatever. We've got federal gun control on the books for I went to government-run school, so my math is terrible. I can't add and subtract without a phone these days. We've got federal gun control on the books since 1934 with the National Firearms Act, the Gun Control Act of '68, its amendments in '86, the Undetectable Firearms Act of 1988, the bump stock ban of 2018, and of course they're trying to push forward probably more today and in the future. But so we need to actually deal with both of these. And one is, for example, and I hate the term for it, but here's from an article that TJ Martinell published on the 17th about a constitutional carry bill that is going to be up for consideration in Alabama, SB 5. And I don't want to focus necessarily just on the bill itself today or on the legislation. If you guys are really interested, and if I have some time, I'm not planning on doing an episode on Friday on the 1st, but I might do an extra weekend live stream where I cover some of the legislation that we're going to be following a little bit more closely in the coming weeks. Maybe I'll do that. We'll see. But here's an article that TJ wrote, and he's talking about constitutional carry, and I think they're better called permitless carry. As a quick aside, constitutional carry implies that you get your right to keep and bear arms from the Constitution, and nothing could be further from the truth. If the Constitution didn't exist, you as a human being have a natural right to defend yourself, your property, your state, whatever. St. George Tucker called the right of defense the first law of nature. Samuel Adams was on those same lines as well. Anyways, back to TJ. He says, while permitless carry bills do not directly affect federal gun control, the widespread passage of permitless concealed carry, permitless carry bills in states subtly undermines federal efforts to regulate guns. He goes on, as we've seen with marijuana and industrial hemp, a federal regulation becomes ineffective when states ignore it and pass laws encouraging the prohibited activity anyway. And I would also argue that the more you normalize a culture of self-defense, the easier or less difficult it becomes to actually work with that on a state or a local level going forward. And then it also creates this environment where the feds can't come in and create even more problems. So constitutional carry is something that we support strongly. I don't like the word. I use it anyways so people understand what I'm talking about. I should just start probably, and if you got ideas, I'll take it too, but maybe we should call it permitless carry or something. It certainly gets more traction when we put constitutional carry in the headline, in the title. It gets more reach because that's what the average person thinks of it as. Anyways, so constitutional carry, removing restrictions on the right to keep and bear arms on a state and local level is a very important step to help fight those instruments of tyranny at home. And I don't mean having a battle, but literally just a culture of liberty. And then, of course, we have to deal with that federal gun control. And I did an episode just last month in November called Second Amendment Preservation, Foundation to Nullify Federal Gun Control. We're basically following James Madison's advice in Federalist 46, which has been surprisingly and repeatedly validated by the Supreme Court. Now, remember what I said at the outset there, defining what nullification is not. It doesn't rely on a Supreme Court ruling or opinion. We can do it without it. But when the Supreme Court actually backs up the fact that we don't have to have states or local communities helping the federal government enforce their unconstitutional acts, don't have to use manpower or resources in any way, then it becomes much easier to get that legislation passed. I covered it in some detail back in November. I will link to that as well in the show notes at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty. And these are two strategies that we have to take. We have to deal with both the states and the feds, but it's a different strategy for each. It's a different approach on each to support the natural right to keep and bear arms. And in fact, we have to get to the level of military-style weapons as well. Anyways, we'll cover that more in detail in the coming year. So number two, we have to deal with the police state. Think about it. Those weapons of war, the tactics they use, and even some of the personnel come home and supposedly act as peace officers. I mean, there's really very few peace officers in existence around the country. Even in small towns, they're carrying things like MRAPs and high-caliber weapons. I mean, they're acting like an anti-terrorism squad. They're part of federal joint task forces and drug forces. They're very militarized all over the place, and they may not be outwardly, but they are definitely geared up to do so while they tell the average people they're not allowed to. Only government can do this. And of course, we're supposed to just trust government to be good. This is absurd. And if you think about people who are so opposed to the lockdowns, most of them simultaneously oppose the lockdowns, but absolutely worship the people who are going to be called in to enforce them. This is a very dangerous combination. It's a very dangerous, I don't even know what the term for it is, but it is just, someone knows better, but it's really just a dumb choice. Anyways, so I did this episode called War on Liberty, an overview of federal programs that militarize and nationalize local police in May of this year. And here's from the summary that I think is pretty good. With local police looking and acting more like an occupying army than peace officers every year. I don't think they've looked like peace officers in my lifetime. I watched a ton of Andy Griffith when I was a kid. That does not exist. How did it get this way? From funding, grants, and joint task forces, get an overview of the federal programs that are driving this dangerous trend. So we've got three major federal programs, so we have to do something about it. Three programs that fund the local police. They hand out money, they hand out surveillance tools, they're handing out, for example, stingray devices, drone surveillance, facial recognition tools, or they give them cash to actually go buy that at probably at expensive rates. We also have to end civil asset forfeiture. And then we also have to withdraw from federal joint task forces. So the more that we actually turn local police into local police, the more that we have a chance to actually have them act as peace officers, as Constitution, oath-swearing, dedicated, not just law enforcement, not just government agents, but what they're supposed to be. And I did another episode on that in June, Top 5 Steps to Stop the Police State, where I covered those three things and a few others. Basically, it's very easy to actually get this type of legislation in. It's difficult to pass because they're all state as pigs. And of course, the states love the federal grant money that they get. The term is just twisted because it's not really grant money. It sounds like the feds just made it. Well, they did print it out of nowhere. But they're basically stealing money from you and then funneling it back to your own oppression. But we have to opt out of those programs. It's a very straightforward process. We're just not going to participate in the JAG program, the Edward Byrne Assistance Program, or the 1033 program, where the Pentagon hands out, and a lot of people think, oh, this is just, of course they have to use this military gear, it's all used, but I think the number, from what I recall, was somewhere between 30 and 35% of the equipment that they're handing out through that program is actually brand new military hardware, the same type of stuff that they'd send over to Iraq or to Syria or Yemen, wherever they're sending troops or weapons of war to actually kill people. They're doing that here in the United States as well. Some of it's brand new, some of it's late Model U stuff, some of it's a little bit older, but it's all very high tech and very powerful stuff, but they don't have to participate. They can literally just say, we're not going to be a part of it. And we're going to be tracking legislation on that. I'll cover the legislation in the coming weeks, of course. And of course, if you want to sign up for our newsletter at 10thamendmentcenter.com/register, you can get updates generally weekly or daily on the state of the nullification movement, where we're actually sending out updates on legislation on various issues in states around the country. We also have to end civil asset forfeiture, not just on a state level. And if you've heard me talk about this, there are two forms of civil asset forfeiture where they can just go and basically charge your property with a crime, steal it, and they use that money to fund the police state. So the more militarized that they get the grants from the feds, and then they take your property to the tunes of billions of dollars, billions and billions of dollars. They take it and you have to fight to get it back. It's flipping due process on its head. Think of the many ways this is going to be used. Red flag laws, anybody? If you eliminate due process on one thing, maybe because it's for the drug war and people who support the police are totally opposed to the drug war generally, and then they're wondering why, well, where did this red flag law come from? I live in Florida. Why is my red state supporting this kind of garbage? Because you've set the precedent. As soon as you set the precedent, you're okay, you turn a blind eye to one thing because you like it. Of course, it's going to end up that way forever on everything. George Washington specifically warned about that. In his farewell address in 1796. He basically said, like, look, even though you may think this is the instrument of good today, let there be no change by usurpation. Don't let them do things they aren't authorized to do, even if you like it in the short term, because this is the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed. So we have to understand why things are the way they are. And that's why I have this episode that explains how federal programs have militarized and nationalized the local police, and this is through grant programs and through joint task forces, hundreds and hundreds of them, where basically local law enforcement on your dime are acting as local law enforcement, but they're really part of a federal joint task force, so they're federal agents enforcing federal laws, whether you want them to or not, and you pay for it double. It's just really nasty stuff. But then we also have to just understand that literally you can just opt out of it. We're seeing this happen more and more. And when it comes to asset forfeiture, not only just on the state level, but there's also the federal equitable sharing program. We're at about 8 to 10 states that have actually taken very, very big steps to bringing this to an end completely. Places like New Mexico, Nebraska, Colorado, Ohio, California, and elsewhere. And so that's very important too. So number 2 is dealing with the police state. Number 3 is surveillance. And whether it's the Patriot Act or all the other surveillance technologies that have grown because of the Patriot Act or started after the time of the Patriot Act, we're told over and over and over again, if you got nothing to hide, you got nothing to fear, right? Government doesn't act like that, of course. Government has plenty to hide because they have plenty to fear. But we're also told that if they can't spy on everybody all the time, in all different kinds of ways, on a big picture level, like what the NSA does, or on a very granular local level with things like automated license plate readers that the feds hand out through cash and grant programs that I covered previously, to do local license plate tracking, or cell site simulators, which get all the cell phones close to a cell phone tower, tricks them to connecting to the simulator, the Stingray device, and then does a pass-through to the tower. Meanwhile, what they've done is they've downloaded your location data, they're tracking where you go, all for the crime of owning a phone, or existing, or being outside, or driving, or traveling. But they claim that if they don't have the power to do this stuff, build profiles on people, use the metadata as well, that we're all going to get killed by terrorists. So again, this is fear as the foundation. It's a means of defense against foreign danger to establish the massive surveillance state here at home. Here's how EFF put it in a tweet. This was just, oh man, it was just yesterday. I'm like, man, this is a pretty good one. Government use of face surveillance technology, they say, and this could be any warrantless mass surveillance tool. Government use of this surveillance technology, EFF writes, It chills free speech, it threatens residents' privacy, and amplifies historical bias in our criminal system. I would say the historical bias is really, most of the laws shouldn't exist in the first place. And of course, people with power are going to use that stuff in bad ways. But that's probably another conversation. But we know that the more that they spy on everybody, the more that they monitor people, we've all made jokes about this. Oh, I better not say this online, or ha, 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 the NSA is the only one that can read my post because the social media sites, the new algorithm is not allowing me to reach anybody. But we know the NSA is doing it. And for many people, they actually don't want to say the things that they want to say. Sometimes it's fear of cancel culture, but sometimes they don't want to be put on a list. But if you're not on a list at this point, you're probably doing something wrong. So anyways, surveillance has a lot of problems that go with it, but we have to deal with it. And there are many ways to do it. We can focus locally. Again, just like the right to keep and bear arms, and on asset forfeiture, there's a local problem on a state and a local level. Most of it is funded by the feds, but you can still change the state law to say, we're not going to do this anymore. And then at the same time, there's a national system where that local stuff that's collected is passed along through information sharing environment and fusion centers, and everything done on a local level through license plate tracking and the like. All the surveillance done in Boise, Idaho, for example, comes to us at the LAPD, not us, them at the LAPD or the New York Police Department or wherever. So they all have access to this information all the time. Everything, all local police becomes a national surveillance system. And I covered the local surveillance in an episode back in February, street-level surveillance, top 4 technologies, and strategies to stop them. We're talking about things like facial recognition, of course. You can't do facial recognition but based on the standard of using a warrant, based on probable cause, particularly describing the person or place to be searched or seized, because it's actually searching everybody. Same with a cell site simulator, same with license plate tracking, same with drone cameras, same with all of it. None of it can be done under that standard. And whether we're looking at the federal standard, the Fourth Amendment, or in many places, the stricter standards on a state constitution or state statute level, it's pretty bad stuff. So we're talking about those main things and what to do to stop them. I encourage you to check out that episode. It will be linked in the show notes. Now, of course, we also have the national level. The more that you restrict the surveillance apparatus on a state level, on a local level, the more that you just say, look, you're not allowed to use facial recognition anymore, the less data that they'll have to pass along through the national network of spies, through the fusion centers and information, ISE, information sharing environment, which came out of the Patriot Act. So literally restricting government surveillance on a state or even a hyper-local level actually has an impact on the national and global surveillance state. Every step is an important one. Very small sometimes, but very important. At the same time, we still have the NSA. And of course, for those of you who have followed our work for a long time, one of our signature pieces of model legislation has been to turn off resources, not participate in any government mass surveillance program. Maybe not provide them water, for example, like at the Utah NSA data center in Bluffdale, or turn off electricity using the Texas Independent Power Grid at the massive Texas Cryptologic Center in San Antonio, which is at an old Sony warehouse just miles down the street from a Microsoft data center. Makes it easier to tap right into it. Now, I covered this the year earlier. Here's 2 outliers. How one state turned off the water to the feds and one. This I actually learned about after we developed the strategy to deal with the NSA on resources which they rely to keep their supercomputers running. But it has actually happened in modern times at Yucca Mountain in Nevada. I encourage you to check this one out as well. It's not a really long one. I think the episode's maybe 15 to 20 minutes, but I will link to that in the show notes as well. And before, I've got one bonus that I want to cover. So we've got 3 main things: gun control, the police state, and mass warrantless surveillance. I do want to get to a bonus one that I think is really important. It ties it all together. But if Alan Mosley's still out there, he had asked a question about his annual membership, and thank you, Alan, and everyone else who has been supporting TAC for whether it's a month or a year or 5 years, and I know some people have been for even longer than that. I couldn't be more grateful. I don't even have any magical words. beyond thank you. I can't thank you enough. But he asked, hey, this is a time of year, should I ask, are my donations, is my membership donation to the TAC tax deductible? And I know a lot of people have been asking us about this. Hey, I want to make a year-end donation. Am I going to get a tax form or whatever? I don't know what people do. What organizations do. The reason is because the TAC has never been a nonprofit organization. Here from our website, gifts to the 10th Amendment Center or to 10thamendmentcenter.com are not deductible as charitable contributions for federal income tax purposes. Why? Based on our principles, we won't accept any government handouts, bribes, or tax discounts to partner with the organization we're working to limit. The IRS should not exist. Income tax, this is stealing. We're not looking to work with them, because as soon as you actually get that nonprofit status, they can put restrictions on how you act, what you can say, what you can lobby for, work for, who you can work with, all that stuff. There's all kinds of scrutiny, and the IRS is used as a weapon of oppression. So it is dangerous, in my view, to do that. And of course, we're also proud capitalist pigs. And maybe that's the wrong word. I've got friends who tell me it's not really capitalism, it's free market. So whatever. We believe in markets and freedom, not government corruption and theft like the IRS is. And here, we believe in freedom of action and equal treatment for all organizations. Thus, we see the tax benefits at risk of giving up freedom to operate and express free speech offered to some organizations to be unfair, unequal, and unacceptable. And just one little more line on this. The feds tell us that 501c3 and other nonprofit groups are serving the community and deserve to be tax exempt. But doesn't your neighborhood plumber or carpenter or grocer also serve the community? And especially in 2020, we've learned how important, well, I think a lot of us already knew, but many people have learned how important grocery stores are, or plumbers, or just day-to-day workers. It's so incredibly important for the existence of modern society. And so they're serving the community as well. So we think, therefore, we stay for profit and will never get handouts or grants from those looking for benefits from Washington, D.C. Please join us. Anyways, I just wanted to mention that. I want to thank Alan for all his great work and his support, and all of you out there who have supported our work. So the quick bonus one that I wanted to mention as well, that really importantly ties together these three big ones, and there are many others, of course. These are just the top three that I could think of that I thought were interesting in tying together a bunch of previous episodes. But of course, we have the Federal Reserve. It's the engine that funds and drives the largest government, the largest military empire in the history of the world. There is no stopping socialism while supporting Washington, D.C. in any way. And in August, I did an episode that I think is so important, Status Report in the Fed from the Bottom Up. It talks about how states, local communities, businesses, individual action can undermine and defeat the Federal Reserve, render it impotent. We basically have to get out from under the thumb of the fiat system. And I will link to that in the show notes as well. End the Fed from the bottom up. And this, I thought, was just one. I did a tweet yesterday. I was kind of on a little bit of a rampage. But here, this I think would tie it all together here. Every power you give government to do something you like today, like I was mentioning earlier, what George Washington talked about in his farewell address. Anytime you give government the power to do something you like today, it will eventually be in the hands of people who want to use that power differently against you. And looking over in the live chat, Blue North is saying, man, this is a great comment. Nullify everything. Nullify everything. I mean, if you think, again, the largest government in the history of the world is nothing close to the limited delegated powers that are the Constitution. So if you just said everything is unconstitutional, you're going to be right. I don't know, 9 out of 10 times, 95 out of 100 times. That's a pretty good track record. Rather than having to go through all the details, nullify everything. That's the way to do it. Robert Scott Bell, my great buddy, who does the Robert Scott Bell Show at noon, Monday through Friday, and on Sundays at 10 a.m. These are Pacific time. This is another heroic presentation. Same to you, buddy. I really appreciate it. Anna Ray says, yes, end the Fed. It is so important to think about that as well. So even as every time we're thinking about, well, how is government getting away with this? If you don't also think about how the Federal Reserve is monetizing debt, throwing cash out in people's hands, the idea that we can actually run up all this debt and get away with it is nonsense. It is not going to end well, whether it's in our generation or children's generation or grandchildren. We're harming people every single day that we allow this to continue. Scott Free says, do you have a presence on gab.com yet? Absolutely. We're on, if we're talking social media set, we can't, well, I know they just launched Gab TV. I'm not sure yet if we're going to put our videos there, but we certainly do some posts there, generally one a day on Gab. We're on Instagram, we're on Parler, we're on Minds. We haven't joined MeWe. We're actually experimenting with a lot of these other platforms. We're also on LinkedIn too, so if you want to see some updates, not a lot, we're on a lot of these platforms because we want to be as many places as possible. A lot of people tell us, dude, you got to get off Facebook. No way, no way. As long as we have a free platform to reach people where there are millions and millions of people, we're going to continue doing it. That doesn't mean they're not going to kick us off. I'm certain that at some point, if you're not catching flack, you're not over the target. At some point, if we're not gone, I've done a really bad job. It's kind of like how I wasn't on the Southern Poverty Law Center list for many years. And then I said, well, why aren't I there? And then eventually they did that. So we're definitely on Gab. We're on a bunch of places. I appreciate you asking that, Scott. It's important for us to be as many places as possible. So if you are on a platform, you want to see us there, whether it's just for the podcast or for live streaming videos, or you want to see our memes, we post tons of quotes or links to articles. If you don't want to just go to our website, 10thamendmentcenter.com, and you want to see us on these social networks because that's where you're engaging with your friends, your family, whatever, then let us know. And of course, you can leave that in the comments. You can email me, team@10thamendmentcenter.com. Salt Laker says, they still won't let me bring my flamethrower into Walmart. Interesting tidbit. I've never been in a Walmart. Closest has been a parking lot once in Central California. I'm going to take a look and see if there's any other quick questions that I can get to. Salt Laker says, the pen is mightier than the sword. Funky Euphemism says, you aren't interested in working with your state when they are defending. Oh, I think that was a debate. A lot of the states suck. I think, let's be clear here. When you're supporting the 10th Amendment and you're supporting the states and local communities nullifying the largest government in the history of the world, it's not because they're good governments. I mean, that's an oxymoron. The states are terrible. They're violating your liberty at every turn. But that's also why I think it's so important to understand where a lot of that comes from. And so when I pulled up this episode, I want to get this up on the screen again, War on Liberty, an overview of federal programs that militarize and nationalize local police, same with surveillance. When government looks terrible on a local or a state level, you often, especially in a time like we live in today, you have to follow the money. You have to find out, how are they getting away with this? People, for example, who oppose lockdowns and are thinking it's only the states, but not the emergency order that was signed on a national level earlier in the year, or stimulus checks, or extended on. Basically, the federal government is basically subsidizing this type of behavior. And as long as the feds keep doing this, the states can continue getting away with it. As long as the feds keep running these grant programs and the states participate in it, they're going to have militarized local police. Same with surveillance. When the locals are doing asset forfeiture or participating in the federal equitable sharing program or doing federal gun control, these are all things that are very connected, and you can't just blame one or the other. But certainly if we're talking largest government in the history of the world, in my opinion, versus a nasty local or state government that's basically effectuating federal ideas, federal programs, federal priorities, to me, I know what striking the root is. You know, you cut off the head and it makes it much different approach as well. So anyways, I'm not sure if I just made a lot of sense in that conversation, but hopefully that's something interesting. Anyways, I know I'm kind of getting off on a tangent here. I do want to say thank you one more time for spending a little time with me today. I hope you have a good New Year's lined up, whether you're going to be alone or with family, with friends, whatever. I might do a live stream over the weekend. Let me know if you're interested in doing that. Leave something in the comments, whether it's here live or in the archive, and talking about that, helping spread the word. You can do this for free. It's super easy. You smash a like button, you subscribe, you get notifications, reviews on Apple Podcasts help a ton. All these things trigger the algorithm of the platform that you watch or listen on, primarily the primarily the mainstream ones, and it tells that platform to show the program to more people. We're reaching and teaching more people every single day. Thank you for helping out. And if you do want to pitch in, you can either make a one-time donation, 10thamendmentcenter.com/donate, or become a member over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members for as little as $2 a month. I couldn't be more grateful for your support. Thank you again for spending some of your time with me today. I'll either see you over the weekend or early next week for Monday, Wednesday, Friday, back to normal. I appreciate you being here, and we'll see you next time here on the Path to Liberty.